You're listening to 91.3 FM, WCOW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Dr. Christian Radio of Horror program. You're not listening to us live on Radio of Horror's site, WCOW.org, or Radio Free America. Hoping you're catching us on Radio Horror's YouTube channel, which this interview will be later on in a slideshow. Tonight on the show with us, all the way from a whole other podcast and show. Actually, I don't really know where he's from. But we have one of the heads of the founder of Horror Movie Night, a podcast that happens, I believe, once a week or once a month. Matthew on the show with us. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
No problem. I'm coming from Philadelphia, and yes, we are a weekly podcast. Every Friday morning, we've got an episode waiting for our lovely listeners.
Oh, that's cool. My co-host of the Dead TV podcast is in Philadelphia.
Ah, nice.
So if
Small world.
If you're gonna be at small world, small state. If you're gonna be at DragonCon in a couple weeks, she'll be there as well.
Now, I will be at they're doing the Keystone Con in maybe 3 weeks. I have a pass for that I'll be attending. But that's that and another Monster Mania, and then I'm done for conventions for the year.
So no more conventions through Christmas?
Yep. October 1st will be my last convention of 2018. And then we'll probably take a break until March when the next Monster Mania happens. And then it'll be off to the races. It becomes really tiring. I travel, like I go to San Diego Comic-Con every year with a booth, and I do almost all the Monster Manias that happen. And I try to hit as many of the Philly cons as I can. And I mean, we've bumped into each other at Connecticut's Comic-Con, and it's a lot of travel when you only have X amount of vacation days at your job. So I always want to save a little bit of time to dedicate to like going to Disney World or other things like that. Because I also do a Disney podcast, so that's a whole nother thing that I'm always running around doing. So yeah, it's all about picking and choosing my moves.
What do you do in normal life?
Nothing super exciting. Whenever you call a tech company and you hear that this call is being recorded for training purposes, I'm the guy that gets to listen to those phone calls for training purposes.
Oh, interesting. My girlfriend actually works for a tech company. She just got a big promotion at it. I think you might have met her at the Connecticut when we met.
I think so. Yeah, you were there with someone else.
Yes,
for sure.
Where did the origin of Horror Movie Night come about?
Horror Movie Night, the podcast, has been around for 3 years now, but it actually started almost 7 years ago. It was way back in the old days of Reddit when I first started going on Reddit, and there's the subreddit of our horror. And someone was like, hey, we should come up with like a movie club where we watch a movie and we discuss it. And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. Like, I'm willing, I volunteer in tribute to put this together. So I organized a separate subreddit, which still exists, our horror club. And every 3 days, we would have a new movie for people to discuss. And I did a podcast with my friend Miguel, who eventually had to step down from doing it because he had his own podcast called the Horrible Imaginings Podcast, and he ran the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival in San Diego, and that continued to become a bigger and bigger film festival, so he started dedicating all of his time to it. So I was looking for another co-host, and Scott had been on the show multiple times, so Scott and I started he became the new co-host for Reddit Horror Club. And we were having fun with it, but we weren't like, the only thing we didn't like was not having control of the movies, because the way that it worked was everybody in the subreddit would pick a movie, and then we would just go down that list of movie picks, and then we would start a new round. And Scott and I really had way more fun just shitting on bad movies than we did talking about good movies in the old days. So we wanted to do something different where we had control over the content a little bit more. So I had been podcasting for Geekscape.net for years. When it first launched in 2006, I wrote the first article to ever appear on the website. So I had sent some episodes of Reddit Horror Club to Jonathan at Geekscape, and he really liked it. He said, change the name and you've got yourself a show. So we changed the name to Horror Movie Night, and we kind of, the first like 20 episodes are us trying to juggle Horror Movie Night and Reddit Horror Club simultaneously, and it just didn't really work. So then we just kind of cut ties entirely with the subreddit and just went off on our own. And that's how it's been going for about 3 years. We had a co-host change a few months ago and brought in my little brother Brian, who I think is doing a great job as a co-host. So that's about it. That's the whole history. That's 7 years of history in under 7 minutes. So I'm happy.
Can you recall back in the Wayback Machine the first horror movie you ever watched?
Okay, so from start to finish, or just the first one that I saw and it freaked me out and I had to stop watching it?
You can do both, I guess.
Okay,
sure.
so
Start to finish, but the one that you were either watching because you heard some booby was in it, or you were watching because everyone was talking about it, and you were like, "Oh, I gotta watch this," and you were like,
so as a very young kid, like I'm talking maybe 4 or 5, I watched Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and I was enjoying it up until the point that the clown punches a dude's head off into a trash can, and then I was done with that movie and pretty much done with horror films until I want to say 96 or 97. I had an interest in horror, and I always talk about this. I would walk through the DVD, or through the VHS horror section at Blockbuster, and I would look at all the boxes. I was always too afraid to rent them. And like I would dabble with like giant monster movies. Like I love the Universal movies and the old black and white films. And I would watch like Jaws, and I remember I watched Alligator because I was like, well, it's just like Jaws. I can handle Jaws. I can handle a giant alligator. And like I would justify that. But the first real horror movie I probably watched that sparked the love of horror was The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox. I loved Back to the Future, so I really, really wanted to see another Michael J. Fox movie. And I was like, man, that looks like it could be kind of scary, but it's Michael J. Fox, so it's probably pretty funny too. And I watched it, and I loved it. And I showed it to my cousin, who was really into horror films, and he was like, if you like this, like if you can handle this, you could probably handle Scream. And he showed me Scream, and it was off to the races from Scream. Like I had so much fun watching Scream as a kid that I just immediately got my own video store card. Like my mom signed to give me permission to rent on my own separate card. And there was a mom and pop store that did, if you rented an old movie. So they had like the new rentals where you had to bring it back in 2 days. And they had like the older movies that you could have for a week. But if you return those movies the day after you rented them, you got a free rental. So there was a glitch in their computer system. And if you returned the free rental the day after you got it, you got another free rental. So for one summer, I rented 3 movies one day. So that was like $3 a movie. So about $9 to $10 was spent. And that $9 to $10 paid for an entire summer of horror films where I just would rent 3 movies, return them, get my free rental, watch those all day, return those the next morning for a free rental. And it just kept going circular for a whole summer, and I watched the entire horror section in one summer. So that was really, I was off to the races. It was 0 to 100 pretty quickly for me with horror films.
I think the only video rental store that's still open in my area is like I'd say about 70% pornography now and like 30%
That's
real
usually
movies.
about right.
Which is that I'm shocked even that is even still renting. I'm just like, but it's like free online.
Yeah.
But I love seeing the posts sometimes of people being like, the child will never know what the horrors of not finding anything to watch. My roommate, I love this guy right now, and he buys every goddamn genre film that comes out. So if and it's only very rare that I will go upstairs and he doesn't have the movie. But it's 7, like, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 or 7 walls of DVDs. Taller than me. Like, I could barely, I'm about 5'7". I could barely, with the tip of my finger, touch the top of them sometimes. You know what I mean?
All right, so I'm going to do something real quick. I don't want this to be an all video podcast, but I'm going to click on my camera real quick. And I just want you to see. So this is, where am I at? Right here. So my DVDs are alphabetized. This is South Park to Twilight Zone. And the road just keeps going to the back of the basement.
All right,
So
I will take a picture. I will take a couple pictures when I get home tomorrow. By the time I get home tonight, I just want to go to bed. But I will take a couple pictures when I get home tomorrow and show you what this room looks like. It is unbelievable. This is like one room is just the films, and then he's got a separate room that's television shows.
that's pretty impressive.
It's like a home theater that the walls are just covered in DVDs.
I think my last count was 3,000 titles is in this basement. So,
yeah, I definitely think this is gonna beat that. You'll when you see this, you'll be like, "Holy good God!" I should do like a video, like a YouTube video, like nobody will believe me, but all right, here we go. Woo! And it's just like sometimes the most like the absolute garbage, and all that stuff that comes out from like, God, I can't even think of all the companies right now, but like October Sky, October.
Like just like like we're not just talking horror movies, we're talking about like any cheese that comes out in general.
Yes, like anything that comes right to DVD, like The Basement. I think I just posted a trailer for, or like even, they put out something great once in a while, like Kane Hodder's documentary came out from this company, or the Larry Cohen documentary came out from this company. Or stuff that like Dread Central's now getting into movies, like they've had that clown film and a couple other things, or just the stuff that you see on Redbox sometimes, and you're just like, what is this movie? How are these movies getting made? Where is the funding coming from to make these films?
Who is this for? That's my question a lot of the time.
Yeah, and then I have the directors on the show, or I have the actors, and I just like I will give a good compliment about the film that I was sent to watch, but then I'll find out like they also made Detroit Rock City or something. You know what I mean? Adam Rifkin. I like Adam. If you're listening to this, I like your main film that you came on for, but I like Detroit Rock City better, and he knows that because
Adam Rifkin is a friend of Jonathan from Geekscape, and I've been begging Jonathan to let Adam Rifkin come on the Horror Movie Night podcast. But all I want to talk to him about is Invisible Maniac from 1990, which was his first movie, and it's probably my favorite episode that we've ever done of Horror Movie Night because it is such an obscure deep cut, and it's fantastic. He did two really trashy horror films before Detroit Rock City that I think are masterpieces. So
there's a movie coming out called Hell. Oh God, I gotta look it up because I honestly
is it the Hellfest?
Yes, and I'm on their like Tuesday Red Band trailer posting thing, and they're like, "Who do you want to have come on the show?" And I'm like, "Well, you have all these people. I just can't be choosing. Okay, I want Kane Hodder. I want Bex Taylor. I want this person. Like, would you want the director?" Which basically says to me that I'm not going to get any of the actors I want to get, and they really want to push the director. And I'm just like, yeah, sure, I'll take the director too. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've seen all these other people's bodies of work. Like Bex, I saw every episode of Scream the series, and I watch Voltron: Legendary Defender religiously. So I want Bex on the show because she's in Voltron. She is Pidge in Voltron. So I will promote Hell Theater, but I want Bex Taylor on the show because she was on Scream and Voltron. And Kane Hodder, it's like I've talked to Kane like 1,001 times. That's not really that big of a deal for me. And besides, I wouldn't even talk about Hell Theater with Kane Hodder. I'd be like, "So your documentary came out. Let's talk about that. You cried on camera. That was a huge deal, dude. I couldn't believe that. You're such a manly man," and stuff like that. So, because I had the director of that on the show. What are films that you try to stay away from? And I know you told me over message chat, but I figure you can also talk about it in recording too.
So we, it's tough. So we don't have any like official rules. There's a couple unwritten rules.
Like you're not going to do Alien.
So we try to stay away from, at the end of the day, we have to be able to record an episode that is interesting, funny, and new. So like, people are always shocked, like, "Oh, you guys do bad movie podcasts. I can't believe you never did like Troll 2 or Birdemic." And it's kind of like, well, there's 100 podcasts that have done Troll 2 and Birdemic. Like, I don't know if there's anything new to say or bring to the table on those movies. So that's why we go for like The Invisible Maniac, or I think we just released an episode on The Kindred. Like, these movies that are kind of deep cuts and they're kind of obscure and they're not gonna come, they're not things that everybody knows of. So we try to aim for stuff like that that's a little bit more of a deep cut because we want the show to kind of feel. Originally, it was like, hey, let's just trash some bad movies, and
which is easy.
Yeah, and that's super easy to do. What we wanted to do more as like the show kind of matured and we really started to love what we were doing and we started to meet listeners and we started to build merch and kind of build what Horror Movie Night has become. We have the reputation as the podcast that shits on everything. And listen, if the movie's trash, we're going to call it out as trash. Like, we're not going to pussyfoot around it. But what we always say is like, I always say envision it like this, because every episode is picked in an order. I pick an episode, then Scott picks an episode, then Brian picks an episode, and then I pick another episode. And we usually record in a block of 2 to 3 episodes. So the way that I've always explained it is when I was a kid, me and my friends would on a Friday night have a sleepover and we'd go to the video store and each one of us would rent a movie and we'd watch the movie. And sometimes the movie was great and sometimes it was trash. And we would make fun of the idiot who picked the movie that was trash. And I think that that's basically what the podcast is it's 3 people who really enjoy each other and have a good friendship that don't mind busting each other's balls for having shitty taste in movies. I have a movie that we're going to discuss in November that Scott has been dreading because I've been threatening to pick this movie since we were Reddit Horror Club 7 years ago. But I finally was just like, no, I really want to do this movie. So it's a piece of shit. And I know it's a piece of shit. And that whole episode is going to be us talking about what a piece of shit this movie is. But I think it's going to be a really fun episode because Scott's going to be pissed off that I picked it. So he's going to be ripping on me. I'm going to be trying to defend why I've owned this movie for a decade, even though I know it's garbage. My brother's just along for the ride because he's had to see it multiple times because he's related to me. So, like, it's all about the combination of at the end of the day, it's a podcast about friendship that just happens to be tied around horror movies and growing as horror fans and learning to love this stuff. But with that being said, movies like Alien, movies like The Exorcist, movies like Suspiria, like these classic films, some of them we probably could pick on a little bit, but it's not really something that we are in the mood to do. We're not going to sit there and trash a movie that is because it's beloved and we think it's okay. And we also stay away from anthology films. There's always a chance that we might do a themed month on anthology films, like in a year or so, maybe. Hint, hint for next October to people who listen to Horror Movie Night. But in general, we just found we did like 1 or 2 of them in the early days, and it's very jarring to like have to basically, instead of just walking through one plot line, you're walking through 3 to 5 plot lines. And that eats up a lot of time. And then you've got like segments that are really, really great, and you just kind of want to talk about how good they are. And you've got segments that aren't so great, and you want to make fun of them. And then, unfortunately, most anthology films, there's also a handful of just super boring, forgettable pieces of them. And I know the one that we did was Creepshow 2, which I was going into with like full childhood nostalgia of like, man, Creepshow 2 rocks. And like, I was like, man, the raft is great and blah, 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 blah. But like Chief Whittinghead is a really slow, boring start to that movie. And then like the raft is fine, but it's too long. Like it probably would have worked better, like 10 minutes shorter. And then the same could be said for The Hitchhiker. Like none of those are perfect segments. They're kind of, they've got flaws in them. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing that because all of us have the childhood nostalgia of renting Creepshow 2 and we remember that awesome box art. And like, don't get me wrong, I will never regret how much I loved Creepshow 2 as a kid, but watching it as an adult, there's a lot of issues with it. And not like issues that you can be funny about, but just issues where it's like, wow, this really isn't that well paced. Like, I get why all of the film critics love Creepshow 1 and like kind of are so on Creepshow 2. It's a so movie.
Matt, just real quick, but just so I don't have to catch it again. We unfortunately are radio, so we have to to watch the swearing. We're not on the podcast, so we're on the radio. Even though this is going to go to YouTube, we will be broadcasting this.
My apologies.
Okay. So I think it was just that one time, but that's fine. I just it just takes forever to try and catch it all. I probably
Just
should have
make a
said.
note that it's when I was talking about Creepshow 2.
Yeah, I know where it is. It was like 20 and something seconds or whatever. But I should have said that at the very beginning. That's why I got all the retail talk out of the way, just because of like the chat about like endorsement of retail stores.
nope.
I got nailed about a few months ago, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, give it a rest.
All makes sense. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so anthologies, I can understand being kind of a problem. What about made-for-TV movies like The Night Stalker?
I mean, it hasn't come up. I don't have anything against doing a made-for-TV movie. Like, at the end of the day, we do 2 months where listeners can email us all year round, and we'll pick a movie for a month, for 2 months each year. September and April are our listener submitted months that we do. And those are usually pretty good. We're just about to start listener submitted, not this Friday, but the following Friday. And it's the best lineup we've ever had for a listener submitted month. Like, I'm really excited with the movies that we're going to watch. And I think the listeners will be excited too, because with the exception of arguably one of the 4 movies, it's mostly pretty well loved films. There's one that's a little bit of a deep cut, but the other, like 2 of them, I would say most horror fans consider classics, and the 4th one is a little bit of like a cult classic. Like it's a movie that I would love to have the poster hanging in my office, and I think people will be like, "Oh, I remember that from the video store," but it's not like a beloved. We're not talking about like a Halloween 3.
By the way, the name of that company I was trying to remember was Wild Eye Releasing.
Yeah, like I will say this: the most obscure movie that we discuss on listener submitted month for April is we are going to be talking about one of the first after dark horror film series, 8 Films to Die For.
Oh God,
film.
I remember I promoted those freaking things every year it happened or whatever, and it's like I think 1 out of maybe the 8 films was actually good.
The first year would be arguably the best year, and
Yeah.
it just got worse and worse every year.
Was that the year Dread came out, based on Clive Barker's story, and that movie was
No,
disgusting?
the first year was like Dark Ride, that was like a slasher film that kind of was inspired by Funhouse, starring
okay.
the fat kid from The Big Green.
Wait, the big green?
You never saw The Big Green, the soccer movie? He was also in Sandlot.
Oh yeah. Wait, didn't he play a vampire on an episode of the X-Files where Mulder and Scully couldn't get their stories straight?
He did.
That's where I remember him. I never saw The Big Green, or if I did, I don't remember it. But
I just remember him on the cover. He was on the,
yeah,
he was the cover of The
maybe
Big
that's
Green.
what I remember. That's the nice thing about Netflix is I've been going through Netflix, going through like older films or whatever, because I can watch like the stuff that's like binge on demand right away, like iZombie or something I'm getting caught up on. But I've been going through trying to find like older films that I never saw before, and not necessarily horror, just be like, oh, I never saw this. Okay, I'm gonna watch it finally. It was Face Off, or it was like I think The Last Despicable Me.
So I get made fun of by every human being that knows me, because I actually still get the discs in the mail from Netflix on top of using their streaming service.
Really?
Because
They still do that?
Yeah, DVD.com.
Wow.
So I mean, I get 2 discs a week, and it helps me keep up on like the movies that they don't have available. Like I finally saw Flight of the Navigator for the first time.
Oh my God. You were off this show. You've never saw Flight of the Navigator? That movie is great.
This is the thing that I have to explain to people all the time. When I was a kid, there was 2
You
phases.
were deprived. That's what you.
Phase number 1 was I only wanted to watch things that were animated. It didn't matter if it was a kid's movie. It wasn't animated, I wasn't interested. And then horror came along. Like that was it. Like that was the great divide in my life for a really long time. So there's a lot of like live action kids movies that I was just late to the party for, with the exception of Goonies and Monster Squad. Those were like the only 2 live action kids movies that I adored. And pretty much anything Tim Burton did as a kid I liked. I loved like Beetlejuice and Pee-wee, but I don't think I would have liked either of those things if Pee-wee's Playhouse wasn't a show and Beetlejuice didn't have a cartoon series. Like, that was the big connection. If there was a Flight of the Navigator cartoon series when I was a kid, I probably would have watched the crap out of Flight of the Navigator.
At Boston Comic Con recently, Paul Rubens was there and was charging $100 a selfie with people.
So I gotta give credit to Paul Rubens. He was at Monster Mania in March, and every person who met him spoke so highly of him as a person. And there was this one couple that said that, you know, they paid $100 for an autograph and a selfie with Pee-wee, and they came up and they had a old talking Pee-wee doll in the box, and they had their little girl was dressed as Pee-wee because she loves Pee-wee's Playhouse. So they walked up to the table and he was just like ecstatic that this little girl was a fan of something he had done 30 years ago. So not only did he sign the box, but he's like, I also like to sign the shoes of the toy if you give me permission to take it out of the box. And they're like, no, that's fine. So he took it out and he signed the shoes. And then he was like, and for a little girl, and he like signed a bunch of different autographs on like headshots for her to put in her room. Like they said, like for their $100, they got like 7 things autographed from him because he was just so excited to see like a young generation, like his stuff passed down to a young generation. So I definitely think that he, you know, he might charge high, but it seems like you tend to get a good bang for your buck as long as you treat him fairly nice. But there are, trust me, doing the cons I've done, there are some people.
Yeah, I mean, God, I think a lot of people at Boston Comic Con this year were so gosh darn overpriced. It was ridiculous. And then some people were just like, they'll only sign and no photos. They're not even doing like a celebrity photo thing. I don't know why, but then of course I kind of saw them and I heard some people comment. I'm like, yeah, that's probably why they're not doing photos anymore, because they definitely don't look like that, and I'm pointing to their DVD. One of the nicest people I actually got to meet was Freddie Prinze Jr. and I asked him about, when are you ever going to do a convention with your wife? And he's like, it is something we talk about all the time and is brought up all the time, and we both kind of want to do it, especially since now we've both been in Star Wars and that part of Star Wars is over for us, because he was Katano, whatever the character's name was, the main character in Rebels, and she was Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah.
So I'm like, do a Star Wars convention then.
Yeah.
Because she won't get anything. She won't get anything to sign from Star Wars. She'll get Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
So my one friend helps run Monster Mania every year on the East Coast, and he told me actually of all the years that he ran it, the nicest person he's ever worked with was Matthew Lillard. Said that he was the most like just genuinely down-to-earth guy. Yeah. He said it was him and Ethan Embry were both just like sweethearts.
I met Matthew Lillard twice, and yeah, he was totally cool both times. He loved talking about I think we talked about Scooby-Doo more than anything else, and I keep forgetting to ask him about Scream, but I mean, Scooby-Doo is now so much in his life because he's been the voice of Shaggy for so long now.
He did such a good Shaggy in those movies.
Yeah, and I would love to see him at like a con with like other Supernatural people, considering that, you know, they just did that crossover episode, which was like, sorry Supernatural fans, the only good episode in the last several years of that show.
Yeah, I've heard that's taken a bit of... I've never watched it, but I've heard it's taken a real dip from what it used to be.
Well, I think it is finally going to end. I think they did announce that it would be the final season, just like it's the final season of like The Big Bang Theory, which a lot of people are shocked about considering how much money The Big Bang Theory makes with CBS and stuff. But it's like, what else are you going to keep doing with these characters? Everyone's got married. I mean, now everyone's going to get pregnant too? It's like... That is the progression, unfortunately. It's like, oh, marriage, now pregnancy. It's like, how about you kill one of the characters off? That would.
You can only do so many seasons without writing any jokes when you're The Big Bang Theory.
Right. And I say that, but now I'm thinking about the fact that Kelly Kuko was already on a show that one of the stars of the show, if not the star, was unfortunately killed off in real life by death. John Ritter died making her first TV show.
Oh, yeah.
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 Was John Ritter ever in a horror movie? I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, he was in Bride of Chucky.
He was in Bride of Chucky, and not a horror film per se, but a film... There's a certain collection of comedies that I feel like are comedies that are enjoyed more strongly by horror fans. Stay Tuned.
Or Bad Santa.
Or Bad Santa. I could give you that too. I also, my number one, like, it's not a horror movie, but I feel like only horror fans truly appreciate it, is Freaked, starring Alex Winter. Just one of the grossest comedies. Starring, you got Mr. T as the bearded lady, Bobcat Goldthwait's the voice of a sock. It's a crazy film. If you've never seen it, go see it, anyone listening.
Now, you only got like 3 months left. No, sorry, September, October, November, December. Okay, so you got 4 months left in this year. Why haven't you done Jason Goes to Hell yet? Because it is the 25th anniversary, and that movie is bad.
So
it's right up the alley of your podcast.
So Jason Goes to Hell, we have an issue with. The issue is that we did do an episode of it, and then the episode's audio came out real bad.
Oh.
And we never released it. And it was like one of those, like, that was like in our first year, and we're still getting used to the audio setups, because we were gonna release it on Friday the 13th, and then we were just like,
unfortunately, the next Friday the 13th is in September of next year.
Yeah, I was like, I don't really feel like re-recording this. I think we're gonna get to it eventually. I don't know if we're gonna watch all of the Friday the 13th movies for the podcast, but we've done Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yep.
I really want us to do Jason Lives, because I think it's the best of that franchise. I want to do Part 5, New Beginning, because I think that it's the most unfairly shit on of that franchise. And then, yeah, Jason Goes to Hell is a movie that I kind of like, but I know that I'm in the minority for it.
It's the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw on the big screen. On a big screen.
Okay, that goes a long way.
Let me rephrase that. On a big screen, not the big screen. I saw it at camp, in a theater at camp. They had a big theater, so I got to see it on a big screen. Whatever. I didn't go to the movie theater, but I still saw it on the big screen.
Still cool.
Still cool. The fact that they showed it to us at camp, a bunch of 14-year-olds, especially that one scene in the tent with the man and the woman, and then Jason comes along and slices it, and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah. I was going to say, I think it was the second one that I watched. The first one I ever saw was Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah, it definitely was not the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw, but it was the first one I ever saw on the big screen.
Yeah. So I saw both of them on, like, I don't know, USA or TNT during Halloween. They would just play random.
It must have been TNT, because as far as I remember, Universal only had access to the Paramount films.
Gotcha. So yeah, it was probably TNT. That makes sense, because I think TNT had Monster Vision.
Yes, with what's his name, who just did
Joe Bob Briggs.
Yeah, who just did the big marathon.
Yeah, so TNT would play, like, I would watch Jason Takes Manhattan, and then it would go right to Jason Goes to Hell. But like, they didn't play any of the movies leading up to it, so I watched those two back to back, like, edited for TV, and was like, this is weird. And same thing happened with, I saw Halloween 2 before I saw any other Halloween movies, because again, just airing on TV in the middle of the day in the 90s and early 2000s. But that was like, that again was still, that was pre-Frighteners, as I like to refer to it. It was just like, oh, this is a thing. But for me, I think it was just, I was afraid to see blood and see people die. So if it was on TV, it was acceptable to me. I was like, okay, all the stuff that I'm afraid of will be gone. That was very weird. I have a lot of, like, anxiety, and that leads to a lot of very neurotic rules that I create that only make sense to me. So, and apparently that existed as far back as me being like 5, was creating these little, like, okay, well, as long as there's no blood, I can watch it. If it's just a giant monster movie, I can watch it. Like, I just wanted to watch horror movies, and I just had all these excuses not to do it.
Oh, I created the same type of rules when I play sometimes a video game that I know is going to scare the crap out of me at night, so I only play it during the day. And that happened with, like, I think Dead Space. I never wanted to play Dead Space at night, but I played the hell out of it during the day. Now, talking about a franchise that just kind of went belly up and never came back. That's something that's also, it's like, not tapped as much anymore, is the sci-fi horror franchise. It's like, where did that go?
Yeah, I think that it's such a hard, I feel like I would blame it on the year 1997, actually, because I think in 1997 you had Event Horizon and Starship Troopers. I could be wrong. I'm never like confident.
I think you're right. And Alien Resurrection.
Yeah, but I think specifically Event Horizon and Starship Troopers were these sci-fi horror movies that were advertised as just regular sci-fi movies.
But okay, come on, no. I mean, Starship Troopers was advertised as an action comedy movie, and when you went and saw it, it was a stupid action movie and nothing scary about that movie. However, I think you are right about Event Horizon, but I mean, Starship Troopers, you knew what you were getting when you saw the trailer with the giant bugs.
So my thing though is like Starship Troopers was also, you have to remember that was coming out around the exact same time that the Star Wars re-releases were getting put into theaters.
Right.
And it was designed to, like, there were a lot of stories of families assuming that this was just going to be another Star Wars movie and taking their kids to see this movie that was super violent and gory.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't think Starship Troopers is a scary movie, but it's a very gory, gross movie.
Yeah.
And I think that those two films really made it apparent that it is difficult to market sci-fi horror because I feel like general audiences want it to be one thing or the other.
You know what I would love to see them remake for today, because it would be so off the wall, but they, you know, if they did it with like any type of respect, is I'd love to see like Life Force remade.
Yeah, I mean, but will you ever find anyone as gorgeous as Matilda May?
Oh, totally. I mean, if they remade that movie, let's say, let's shift the space-time continuum a little bit, okay? I would cast Natasha Henstridge in that role because of Species, because she had no problem being in Species that nude that often.
What was the Alien movie? Crap.
Also, Matilda May is only in that movie for 17 minutes, and people make it out to be like, oh my God, she's nude all the time. It's like, yeah, she is. But for a total of 17 minutes, she has 5 more minutes of screen time than Godzilla did in the 2014 film.
Yeah, but Matilda May makes those minutes matter.
I honestly, it would not. Don't forget, also, Matilda May was not an American actress. She didn't speak any English. If you can't find an American actress that's either a celebrity or a woman who's up and coming in Hollywood who wants a big break, you can easily find a foreign actress like they did in Splice.
That's true.
And I don't think it'd be very hard. I've heard that same thing before, and I'm like, no, okay, so you have. And don't tell me you can't find a huge Hollywood celebrity, because Scarlett Johansson did in Under the Skin, and she was nude a lot more than Matilda May was.
Yeah.
And Scarlett Johansson makes $40 million a year.
I'm just saying, Matilda May, that was a big one for a lot of people. I think.
I know, but it's like, again, if Scarlett Johansson's gonna do a movie where she's like this, spoiler alert, black alien gooey thing underneath her smoking hot skin. And by the way, she did that movie when she was pregnant too.
I didn't know that part, actually.
Yeah, she had just found out she was pregnant when she did that movie, and it was like, all right, let's do the nude film. Because I got to shoot the Avengers right afterwards. And she shot the Avengers with stunt doubles and motion caption faces, because she was about 6 to 7 months pregnant when she did Age of Ultron. But yeah, a lot of people don't know that. It's like, oh yeah, she is pregnant in that movie, but it's right at the beginning of pregnancy. So either she didn't know or she did know halfway through filming, but she was still like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The smoking hot body versus the pregnant body, which is still smoking hot, not to get into a whole, like, what are you saying? You can't be hot if you're pregnant. No, that's not what I'm saying. You gotta watch what you say. Someone's gonna capture it online and be like, he said this about pregnant women.
And then you don't get to do the next Guardian of the Galaxy movie.
Right? Jeez, talk about, like, you didn't know what you were getting into before you went to bed with him.
It's like, did you not see Romeo and Juliet? Because I'm pretty sure he still has it on his resume.
Yeah, did you not see Super? Doesn't Ellen Page rape Rainn Wilson in that movie?
And I think she says it's so gooey, which doesn't really, like,
yeah, we're not going to get into the description of
disturbing.
Yeah, we're not going to get into the description of the sex scene in that movie between Ellen Page and Rainn Wilson, but it's pretty non-consensual on his end.
Yeah, no, it's a rough. I love that movie, but yeah, that seems a little. It's a little bit of a tone shifter.
Yeah,
if I've ever seen one.
Yeah. What do you got coming up that you can at least tell us that is coming out on the site? Can you hopefully tell us something?
When is this coming out?
All right, so we're recording this on the 26th of August, and this will air hopefully after Labor Day.
Okay, so we just did our episode on Patchwork, which is something that's rare for us. We don't often talk about new movies, and we definitely don't talk about new movies that are kind of still unknown. So normally we keep our picks very, very secret and don't talk about them or anything. We'll give like a couple little hints, but in general, when the episode comes out is when you know what that episode is. We're doing something different with Patchwork because we think it's a masterpiece, and we think that everyone should take the time to watch it.
Like Alligator?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's basically, I mean, if you've never seen Patchwork, it is a modern day Frankenhooker, is the best way to describe it. It is a really crazy, dark, weird comedy that is just so fun. It's one of the most fun films I've seen in a while. So we really want people to know about this movie. The director went on to make Tragedy Girls, which I think was a great film from last year. So we really want people to see Patchwork. So we're really pushing that. And then, you know what? I'll give you guys, here's an exclusive. The first movie of Listener Submitted Month is actually going to be on 1990s Tremors, starring Kevin Bacon.
Wow. Yeah. And they were just about to do another Tremors movie, and the plug got pulled on it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not crying about that. Tremors, I was the person who liked Tremors the most out of the three of us while revisiting it. We all talked about how much we have a nostalgia for it. I think that the movie still holds up and is flawless. Brian and Scott felt like there were some real pacing issues in the movie. So, you know, you can hear our full thoughts on it. And also we do our Patreon page, patreon.com/HMN podcast, where each month we'll put up a bonus episode as voted to by the patrons. Mm-hmm. So the one that's coming out shortly after Labor Day is we did Howard the Duck as our Patreon bonus. And we're going to probably, if not in September, then October, do a brand new bonus series that's going to be exclusively for Patreon. And we're calling it Fear Street Pitch, which is that none of us have ever read any of the Fear Street books by R.L. Stine. So all we're going to do is look at the covers of Fear Street books and see what the title is. And then each one of us has to pitch what we think the book is and how we would do it as a movie.
Oh, please do.
We're just doing them in order. We're going to start from book one and work our way through the whole series. So.
Oh my God. Man, I tried to do this back in August or whatever. Sorry, back in April when the trailer dropped for The House with the Clock in Its Walls. I was like, oh my God, fantastic. I love John Billers. He influenced everything I do. I have every one of his books. And I got his ex-wife on the show / his widow. I got I did a big thing about John Bellairs. I just got Brad Strickland interviewed today. He's the guy who took over the legacy. And I said, I'm going to do a review of every one of my favorite John Belair books leading up to the movie coming out in September. I've done one review. Because trying to review books is freaking hard. Especially you don't have time to reread them.
If this URL still works, so I'm going to test it out real quick.
But I got the interviews with the people who really count as part of his legacy because he died in 1991. So I got his ex-wife. I got the guy who took over the series. So I'm actually doing okay, even though my reviews of the books have been not exactly there.
So if you search, the URL is no longer active.
Okay.
But if you search Pure Matitude Blogspot, you'll find my old blogspot.com. And at one point, I reviewed 2 Octobers in a row, all 62 Goosebump books.
Oh, my God.
So you can read my late 20s feelings on the Goosebump books.
But when you do this Fear Street thing, the two I'm really interested in, because it's the only two I still have. I have a recreation of them. Is Goodnight Kiss and Goodnight Kiss 2, which were vampire books. It's the only two vampire stories R.L. Stine. I'm sorry, he did write 2 other non-Fear Street vampire stories about twin sisters who become vampires, or one becomes a vampire, the other one has to team up with her recently learned bounty hunter vampire hunting father. But the Goodnight Kiss 1 and 2 were like big influences on me for, like vampire related stuff. And, like my girlfriend pointed out to me, she's like, you don't seem to escape vampires. And I'm like, no, I don't, because I've got Dracula, the comic book I'm currently working on, the gender swap story. I have a vampire ebook. I have vampire friends that are immersed in vampire culture in ways that it's hard to explain. If anyone listening, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm about to start covering Dracula, the series, the NBC series that was canceled a couple years ago on the Dead TV podcast. So Goodnight Kiss Part 1 and 2 were like the first full vampire stories I ever read when I was a teenager, when I was like 11 or 12 years old, and I had no idea what like hormones and what they were talking about in the book, because there's a lot of making out and a lot of like, subtle hints of sexuality and stuff.
Huh.
And I honestly think that out of all the R.L. Stine books, maybe because it's vampires, they're probably the most like sexualized books in a way. Like there's not like sex in the books, but there is a lot more teenage promiscuity than any of his other books, I think.
I think that makes sense with it being vampires, though. That's kind of a vampire thing.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about like undressing, and they talk about like the nectar. They don't call it blood. It's two vampires who make a bet that who can get a victim to turn.
I'm looking forward to when we get to those then.
Yeah, the babysitter was another big one that was probably the one I was introduced to. What's funny is that in the 6th grade today, or was the 6th or 7th grade today in 2018, I guarantee a teacher would not be able to recommend an R.L. Stine novel to the class to read. Well, hey, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about the Horror Movie Night podcast. I've been a fan of it for, I'd say, about a year.
Nice.
I've listened to most of the episodes of the movies that I'm familiar with and a few that I'm not familiar with. Just because it's so bad, I don't want to watch it, but I let someone else do the bad, dirty work for me.
That's what we're there for.
But there's a couple I still haven't listened to, like the Evil Dead remake I just saw you've done, Jennifer's Body, which, God, if you could believe, next year is the 10th anniversary of Jennifer's Body.
Sweet.
Yeah, right? It's also the 25th anniversary of, like, the creation of the Power Rangers. I feel very old.
I do want to throw a quick plug out there, if that's okay. I don't know how many of the Radio of Horror people are fans of Disney, but I also produce a Disney podcast that I wanted to promote real fast. It is two friends getting drunk on wine and talking Disney. I believe we're the only Disney podcast that's listed as explicit on iTunes. It is Disneato Podcast, DISNEATO podcast at .com, and you can find our first, like, I think 16 or 17 episodes are up live. So,
all right,
some drunken shenanigans there.
Do you make sure you actually are intoxicated when you start reviewing this movie?
I don't drink.
How bad is your liver?
I'm always sober. I am the most sober man in podcasting, I like to say.
We my co-host for the Dead TV podcast, who's now done like 3 fan commentaries for us with me, and every time we seem to be doing them, she has the liquor ready to take a drink when some stupidity happens in the movie. And we recently watched Spawn, the 1997 Todd McFarlane film, and it was every time Spawn was like whining about Wanda or whatever, she took a drink. So, and the next one we're going to do is Jason Goes to Hell, because we're covering Friday the 13th, the TV series right now, and John D. LeMay leaves that show to try and do a movie career, and 3 years later he'll be in Jason Goes to Hell. And I hope he'll come on the podcast at some point. So to talk about Friday the 13th, the series, but he kind of left Hollywood and seems to have left all that behind. So, but he's expressed interest in it based on recommendation by a producer we had on from the show, who does listen to every podcast and does enjoy us ripping on the TV series. So,
very cool.
So it's good to know he has a sense of humor, because it's some episodes he's written too or produced that were like, Jesus Christ, what is this? Why? So, and sometimes we get some fans that's just like, wow, you're a little hard on the show that you want to review. And it's like, wow, you don't have to actually listen to it if it bothers you that much, is the only response I can come up with. Because it's like, do you not admit that this is not a 100% great show? It's a great premise, but Jesus Christ, they made 72 episodes of this show. And not one of them starred Jason. Well, hey, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, man. Always a pleasure.